Okay, today we're going to look at how to make objects move around using script. So different than we've done in the past, where we've been able to move objects using the timeline, using motion tweens, that kind of thing, shape tweens. Now we're going to start moving objects around where we use script to make that happen. So what we're going to do is start off by creating two objects. One object is an object we're going to move around, like I said, with script, and another one that's going to act as a button. When we click on it, then actions will happen to the other object. So let's start by creating a button. So we're just going to draw an oval on our screen, and I'm going to make it a symbol. So F8 to make it a symbol, and I know I said button, and we could choose button here, but all it is for is just to click on something. It's not going to have different states like we've talked about when working with buttons. So I'm going to call this one Start. Now, different than what we've done in the past, when we work with our script, it's going to access this object through an instance name. So on the properties, we're going to add a name, and we'll call it Start. So let's create our second object, is our object that we're going to be moving around all over, and we'll just change a slightly different color. And I'm going to use the polystar tool. I haven't used that much. So there's our object, and again we're going to make it a symbol. Also a movie clip symbol, and we're going to call it star. I know it's not a star, but it's close enough. And we'll give it an instance name as well, star. And we'll call it star1, because we could have more than one object, or more than one polystar, I guess. So star1. Now we're ready to start doing some ActionScript. So to get to our ActionScript window, we hit our F9 key. And there's another way to get there. You can also go to Window, and then Actions, to get our actions window to pop up. Either way works fine. Okay, and by the way, you can kind of minimize it by hitting these double arrows at the top, and it goes to this little action mini window here, I guess, and just click on it to open it up again. So the way this works is I have to select our object that I want to add code to. And we can, instead of having us write all of our own code, we're going to make it a little bit easier, and we're going to use what's called code snippets. So it's ready-made code that Animate creates for us. So on the top in our code window or actions window, we have this code snippets button. We're going to click on that, and it creates, here's a little window at the bottom, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that's pre-made for us. And depending on what we want to do, it'll be in different folders. So excuse me, this button, when we want to click on, it will be an event, and you'll get used to knowing where to find things in which folder as the more you work with it. So it's a mouse click event. We click on something and something else happens. So we're going to click on our button and then double click on our mouse click event, and it creates it up in our actions window. And you'll see that there's a whole bunch of stuff here that I'll go through, but this beginning stuff is all just instructions, comments, doesn't have any effect on our how it runs. So we'll delete that. And so here's what we see. The start button that we created, it's going to listen for an event which happens to be a mouse click. When the mouse click happens, it will call this little function here from there to there. And there's code inside here. Again, it's just comments. Comments are just these little double lines, and we don't need any of that stuff that's actually in there, so we'll delete that. Whatever happens has to happen between this beginning brace bracket and this closing brace bracket. So if you go outside of it and do code, it's going to generate an error. Has to be in between. What often happens is one of these brackets gets deleted by accident, and it'll also generate an error. So if that happens, it'll usually tell you what to find, that it needs an extra or a closing brace bracket or something like that. So in between these beginning and closing brace brackets is where you put your code. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to move this object, let's say it will go to the right. or let's say we'll go to a specific spot when we click on the start button. So we say the name of this object, which we renamed star1. Oops. Sorry, my mouse is jumping around. Star1 dot. And we want to say the x coordinate is going to equal, let's go to 150. So that's the exact location of 150 pixels, I guess, from the left of the screen. So let's try and run it by doing Control Enter. So when this button is pressed, it should move this to 150 from the left side of the window. And it did it. So you can press it as many times as you want. It's always going to go to 150. And you can move those windows around, or those numbers around. We could also do at the same time star1.y, so the y coordinate, we could set it to go to something. We'll do 150 as well. Notice I'm putting a semicolon at the end of each line. So let's run it, Control Enter. So I'm going to click on the button, and you see it went 150 from the right and 150 down from the top. Okay. So instead of saying these exact coordinates, we can actually say we can add something to where it currently is. So for example, I'm just going to get rid of this line. And we want to say we want to add to where it currently the x position is. So the way we can do that is by doing a plus in front. So plus equals. So star1 dot x plus equals, and we'll say 10. So in other words, we're adding 10 to its existing x coordinate. So if the x coordinate happens to be 50, when we click on this button, it's going to be 60. Click on it again, it'll be 70, and so on. So let's try it. Not sure why it's taking longer today. There we go. So click on it. Every time it's adding 10 pixels to its current x location. And we could do the same thing with the y. Works exactly the same way. Oops. Star1 dot y plus equals 10 or 20 or whatever you want to increment by. So then I run it. Now it's going diagonal. It's adding 10 to the x and to the y axis as it goes. Okay, so there's other things we can do as well. We can go star1 dot alpha. If I could type. Alpha is the amount of transparency there is. And the transparency goes from 0 to 1. 1 is fully opaque, or that you can't see through it, and 0 would be fully transparent. You can see all the way through it. So we can set it to equal something, or we can do the same as we did above and say I want to add or subtract to its current alpha value. Currently the default is 1, which is fully opaque. You can see the whole thing. So let's go minus equal. We're going to subtract from itself, or its current alpha state. We'll subtract 0.1 each time. So Control Enter. We click on it. Now not only does it move, it's getting more and more transparent every time I click on it until it will disappear. Okay. So there are lots of things you could change. That's just a start, some simple things that we can do. Let's look at one more way of doing things. Let's say we want to affect how the timeline from jumping from one keyframe to another keyframe, or one frame to another frame, I should say. So let's say not only does it do this, but let's say we just want to jump to frame 10 and start playing something. So let's put something, by the way, if you look in your timeline, you'll notice there's another layer that was added. As soon as we start creating some code, it adds an actions layer, and the A is on that keyframe. The A shows that there is actions on that frame. And you can add actions to any frame, and it's good to keep all your actions on one timeline, or on one layer of the timeline. So let's add another layer. I'm going to call this one text. I put test, but it's text. Trust me. We'll go to frame 10 and we'll do a keyframe. Every event has to be onto a keyframe. So on that frame, I'm going to put some text. I'm just going to put my name like so. So I'm going to have my name show up for 10 frames. So I'll do another keyframe. And you'll notice that everything went away except for my name. And we want to be able to see the other stuff, the back, the other objects. So we're going to do a keyframe just to extend up till there. So keyframes there. That's right. Okay. So we want it to jump to that frame. So let's go back to our action script and we're going to add something else to it. We're going to add go to and play. Notice the A and the P are uppercase. And we want to play at frame, start playing at frame 10. So it's going to jump to frame 10 and start playing there. Again, we're ending with a semicolon. Oh, we should have added one there too each time, so we know where the end of the line is. Okay, so if I run it, you'll notice that my name is flashing on here. So what is happening is when I start the program, it automatically starts playing here before it gives us a chance to even click on the button. So we need to tell it to stop at that first frame and just kind of wait there. So if we go back to our code, and the very first thing you want to do when we start the program, put at the top, I'll put a stop with a beginning and end brackets, regular brackets, and then a semicolon. So let's run it again. And you'll see now it's just sitting here waiting. So when we click on this start button, it's going to move and play my name. So it's going to jump to frame 10 for 10 frames, and so on. Okay. We can also let's say we click on a different button and have it play at a different place in the timeline. So let's do that. Let's go to layer 1, the first layer, and let's add another object. So let's add another button. Let's go over here. Okay, we'll create a symbol and call it start 2. And we need to give it an instance name, start 2. Okay. And we'll have to create some code for it. So the same way we did with the other button. Make sure it's highlighted, go to your code snippets and double click on the mouse event. And it will add the code. There's our other code and it just adds it underneath. And again, it adds some extra code that we don't need. We'll get rid of that stuff. And now we are working with start 2 instead of start. Okay, but it's the same thing basically. So we're going to say when that button is clicked, we're going to go to a different frame. So let's make what happens on the frame on the test, or which would be my text layer, to frame 30. We'll do a keyframe, and we'll change the text that's in there to my last name. And we'll have that last for another 10 frames. Okay. So what we want to do when we press the other button, it's going to go to this frame 30 and last for 10 frames. Again, we want to extend all these things so that they last all that way. So keyframes, so on. Okay, going back to our actions layer and the first frame, and we will say go to and play, and we want to jump to frame 30. Okay, so let's do Control Enter. When you press on this button, it says my last name. That works perfect. just double check the other one, and you'll see it says my first name and then my last name. Well, that's not what we wanted. We didn't want that to happen. So let's explain what is happening. We click on that first button and it jumps to frame 10, plays it to frame 20, but just keeps going and into the next frames, and we don't want that to happen. As soon as we finish frame 20, we want it to go back to the beginning and wait there again. So at frame 20, once it's finished that first part, on this actions layer, we're going to click on that frame and add some code to it to say go to and play, and we want to say go to play 1, frame 1. So now when we do it, test the second button, that still works. First button, and that still works. Place the name. Hopefully that all makes sense. Okay. And that is all we'll work for today, and we'll see about the next ActionScript lesson.